Have you ever come across someone who just loves children? And they tell you how much they love children? It goes something like this. Let me walk you through it. Oh, I just love children. Children are amazing. Children are incredible. And it goes on and on and on. Let me be frank. Children sort of scare me. Don't get me wrong. I really like kids. I'd like to think that one day, when I grow up, I'll have children of my own. But for right now, I really like other people's children because you can always hand them back when things really go wrong. On a serious note, kids scare me, but probably not for the reasons you may think. The popular children's author Maurice Sendak once said that he thought it was unnatural to think that there's such a thing as a blue-skied, white-clouded, happy childhood for anybody. He added that childhood is a very, very tricky business of surviving it, because if one thing goes wrong, or if anything goes wrong, and usually something goes wrong, then you're compromised as a human being. Now, this is me, at 3.5 years old. It was July 24th, 1986, and I'm sitting next to my newborn baby sister, Jill, in a hospital in Denver, Colorado, my hometown. Now, if you would have told me then what we know now, that I wasn't going to grow up to be a paleontologist or an astronaut or any of these other things I aspired to be, well, I would have been greatly disappointed. Rather, if you would have told me that at the age of 33, I would have my PhD in social anthropology, whatever that is, that I would be living in Cape Town, wherever that is, and that I would have spent the better part of 5 years working with tuberculosis patients, whoever they are, well, understandably, I would have been wildly confused. As a medical anthropologist, I'm concerned with many of these things that go wrong: the lived experience of suffering, inequality, and disease. I'm intrigued and fascinated by how individuals and collectives make sense of illness, how they give meaning to it, the interventions and the challenges that people take up when they're arguably at their most vulnerable. Believe me, I'm a delight at dinner parties, but this story is not about me. Unlike the other speakers here today, I'm not exceptional. I grew up in a white, American, middle-class household, and whereas I think I was very privileged to have that white cloud, blue-skied childhood that Maurice Sendak so critiqued, I have a hard time subscribing to this notion of the ideal childhood, especially the idea of a vulnerable child. And I'm often asked in my line of work, well, what is it like? What is it like to be you? What is it like to work and do research in this facility right here? One of the reasons why I have a hard time subscribing to these ideas is because I know a group of kids. They also happen to be pediatric TB patients living and being treated in this facility. It's called Brooklyn Chest Hospital, or BCH, and it's where I did a year of my PhD research. And people ask me, they say, well, what is it like to have TB? What is it like to live in a hospital? What is it like to work with such vulnerable children? I don't know, I don't have TB. I'm not going to make those claims, but what I do know is that the experiences of the kids that I've worked with, through the photographs that you'll see here, their drawings, their explanations, it gives us a different story, and ultimately it gives us a different way to understand vulnerability. So let's do this, group exercise time. Let's take a deep breath in, and let's take a deep breath out. We're not just doing that because I'm a little nervous. I'm trying to demonstrate a point. How often do you take for granted the air that you breathe? What if one sip or inhalation of air could make you terribly sick? Now, the kids living in Ward 3 were infected with an ancient airborne disease, tuberculosis. Currently, 1/3 of the world's population is infected with this disease. Now, if we take that global statistic and then apply it here, let's look to your left. Look to your left. Let's look to our right. By these statistics, 1 out of 3 of you has some form of tuberculosis. It's extremely common, let's not freak out. But what is less common is inpatient treatment for TB, especially for child patients. Imagine you're so sick that you have to go and live in a hospital. You are separated from everything familiar. You live there for 6 to 9 to 12 months, or perhaps even longer. This is a story that I want to share with you today. It's a story about a different type of childhood, one which is marked by disease, by painful injections, and a lot of medication. Now, I want to talk about TB a little bit. I hope that's okay, because TB has been around a really long time, and here in South Africa, it's a really big problem. TB bacteria is invisible to the naked eye. Epidemiologically, it's very difficult to trace, and because it's airborne, it's extremely contagious. Now, South Africa, in particular, has been identified by the WHO as one of 32 high-burden countries for TB, tuberculosis, MDR, or multiple drug-resistant TB, and XDR, or extensively drug-resistant tuberculosis. Now, the MDR and the XDR TBs are drug-resistant strains, and they're resistant to first-line and second-line antibiotics. This means that they take longer to treat, and they're more expensive to treat. Currently in the Western Cape province, research estimates that 15 to 20% of all TB burden falls on children. This is significant. And children are interesting because children are susceptible to tuberculosis, but they cannot transmit it. They're susceptible because their immune systems are less developed than those of adults, and they can't transmit the disease, ironically enough, because they don't produce sputum, which is necessary to transmit the bacteria. Here I have a jar full of pills. Okay, they're jelly beans, but you get the idea. Let's pretend. Now, we've all taken medication before, right? We have that in common. Medication is scary because there are always side effects, but we don't know the side effects until we experience them firsthand. The situation at BCH was no different. Doctors and nurses and teachers grappled with these challenges. But how do you tell a 5-year-old that they have TB, that it's life-threatening but curable? How do you explain to that same 5-year-old that they may have a co-infection of HIV? How do you explain to a child, how do you equip them with the knowledge, the tools, that accompanies taking a handful of pills with detrimental side effects, talking them through incessant bouts of nausea, atomic orange vomit, diarrhea, panic attacks, amongst other things? Well, I don't have any pictures of vulnerable children to show you today. It's just not that kind of talk. But I do have drawings, such as this one. I have photographs, I have explanations of children that have been treated for TB in this facility. You'll also notice that the names that I use are not real, they're pseudonyms, and this is in order to protect the children that I worked with. One such child was Scott, and so he explains his photo. He says, "This is the ward. We're inside, we're sleeping. We look like pilchards in a tin, hey? But all the buildings at BCH, they all look the same. On the outside, they're yellow and they're red, but on the inside, they're different. There's the big TB, the MDRs, that's the bad one. And then there's the XDRs. You don't see them, though. It's a jail for them now." A girl named Rosa took this picture. She was 14. She came from Darling. And she said, "I think this is really important for your research. These are the things that are going to save my life. These pills. You see, I'm not going to die, Kate." Gladwin, 13, from Mitchell's Plain, made this little blue man, and he said, "This is my TB. It's a little man, and he has a knife, and he's eating my brain. I have TB meningitis, or TBM. That's why I say this." Shelley, 9 years old, pointed to her TB, and she said, "It's in my chest. I breathe in, and it hurts me, this TB." Rue was 5 years old, arguably one of my youngest patients, and she said, "My TB is a little man who's very hungry, and he's eating away at my stomach and my lungs." A handful of pills, 18 pills a day, 540 pills a month, 6,480 pills for 1 year of average treatment. How many pills do you think are in this jar? How many months of treatment? How many years? This is less than 2 months of treatment, as depicted by jelly beans. An overwhelming task for an adult, much less a child. Adult patients at BCH couldn't believe it that pediatric patients were taking relatively the same medication that they were. They would say, but they're just children. They were shocked, they were stunned. Gladwin said, I wish they could just cut a hole in my stomach and then the pills could go in that way. You take these pills and you feel like you're dying, but I can't die. I'm only 13. I was continuously struck by how nurses and doctors and teachers explain these messages of great severity to child patients. Well, how did they do this? They told the truth. By telling the truth to child patients about the realities of tuberculosis, the inevitable side effects, uncertainty, anxiety, and fear were soothed. Taking your pills is a matter of life or death. Death. This thing that so many of us big people, us adults, fear, was explained in a way that was accessible, in a way that was sensitive, where children really understood what was at stake. Gabby, 8 years old from retreat, took this picture and she said, "These are the big white ones, and I hate them, Kate. They make me want to vomit, and then I do vomit. It all comes out, and I just hate these pills." Okay, so you get the idea. She doesn't like her pills. This pill, this drug, is a mainline TB drug. It's called pyrazinamide, or PZA. And there are a variety of side effects that accompany it. Nausea, abdominal pain, cramping, muscle joint pain, vomiting, amongst others. She took a picture of these big yellow ones, and she said, well, I took a picture of these because these are the ones that I have a really hard time swallowing. Sometimes they're just too big, and they stick to my tongue if I don't take them with water. Nurse says to just take them all in one go, like Carlito do. I can't do that. That's not my way. I take mine 2 by 2. This drug is a little bit more severe. It's an MDR TB drug. It's called taururzidone, and it has psychiatric, psychological disturbances as a side effect. It does cause nausea and vomiting sometimes, but it also causes other things like convulsions and panic attacks, anxiety, slurring of speech, dizziness, seeing and hearing things that do not exist. In our attempts to shield children from the ugly realities of life, or the bare minimum facts, things like living and dying, sickness and health, we forget that children experience extreme fear, anxiety, frustration, and seemingly insurmountable challenges early on in life, and they do so without most of the tools that we learn on our road to adulthood. Their ability to grapple tenaciously with pieces of the ordinary yet seemingly messy everyday set amidst extraordinary circumstances is instinctive, it's adaptive, and it's impressive. I told you when we first met that children scare me. Nothing's changed there, they still scare me, but in a very good way. Through children, I've learned that we as adults take them for granted. We underestimate their capabilities, their capacities, and we have a lot to learn from them. Especially when it comes to a handful of pills and the realities of a disease like tuberculosis. Because when we speak to kids about their deepest fears, their anxieties, however great or small, we're listening to ourselves. As adults, we take a piece of our childhood or our childhood self with us into adulthood, but we forget this often. Life is tough. Life is unequal and life is unfair, and there's no sugarcoating that. Vulnerability is a shared human condition. It's a connection. To be human is to be brave. It's to be courageous. It's to be resilient in the face of adversity. It's all of those things. But to be human is to be vulnerable. And I'd like to think that if we can be vulnerable and honest to children, then we can do the same for ourselves. And it's that which will make us stronger. I'm going to leave you with a quote from one of my favorites. His name was Zwei, and he was 12 years old. He said, "It's my job to take my pills, Kate. If I don't, then what? I will die. I will die slowly, and I will die painfully. I don't want that. I want to live, and so I do my job. One day I'm going to get out of Brooklyn, and I'm going to be a doctor." And so he did. Thank you.